All right. Hey, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this live webinar hosted by Sourcing Force. I hope everyone can see Andrew's screen right now with the slideshow. Just let us know in the chat box. Today, we're going to be talking about spend analytics, and more specifically about the difference between spend analysis and spend analytics, which is quite a subtle one, I would say. My name is Ben. I'm head of the North American market development here at Sourcing Force, and I will be hosting today's session, which will be presented by Andrew Wolfe, CEO at Wolfe Procurement. But just before we begin, I just want to go over a quick introduction on today's presentation. It should take about 45 minutes. We'll do our best to stick to this time frame. But even then, that should leave us 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session. And we'll try to reserve some of your questions for the end of the webinar. Throughout Andrew's presentation, Oliver, the CEO here at Sourcing Force, will be answering your questions in the chat box, which should be on the right-hand corner of your screen. So yeah, feel free to keep your questions coming throughout the webinar. He'll do his best to answer them there. Also, know that today's session is being recorded, so you can review it at any time by revisiting the link that you will receive by email after this presentation. And yeah, with that being said, take it away, Andrew.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate the introduction and welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. In terms of the agenda today, as Ben mentioned, I'm going to try my best to limit my talk to no more than 40 minutes, as I encourage everybody to provide a lot of questions, and hopefully we can have a little bit of a collaborative session at the end. That would be great. In terms of the topics of what we will cover in today's webinar, first we'll start with what is spend analytics, and then we'll go into why spend analytics and discuss some of the benefits around performing such a process. And then we'll talk about the different methodologies in terms of the process. How do you start with spend analytics? How do you implement it? And how do you continually manage the process? As Ben mentioned, we'll talk near the end the difference between spend analysis and spend analytics. And we will wrap up with a live example I have of where we actually implemented spend analytics in a customer site. Okay, so when we start talking about spend analytics, spend analysis, spend management, and even spend intelligence, all these terms are used interchangeably. So I just thought it would be a good idea to start with the definition in terms of level setting for everybody, what we mean by spend analytics, and just so we're all on the same page. So by definition, spend analytics is the process of collecting, consolidating, cleansing, classifying, and analyzing supplier expenditures with the purpose of providing visibility and insight into these expenditures and identifying opportunities to reduce costs, improve efficiencies, and monitor compliance through a dedicated platform. We will get into the differences between some of the different terminologies later on in the webinar, but the key differentiators with spend analytics is its dedicated process and platform, which is encompassing of all these activities related to analyzing spend. So that's the definition in terms of what we mean by spend analytics and what we will base today's webinar on. Okay, so why spend analytics? Spend analytics really plays an integral role through the entire procurement process. It's the starting point for defining any procurement strategy, category plan, understanding your supplier base, current purchasing behaviors, and so on. Thus, it provides for many, many benefits. On the slide here, I've listed the top 6. There may be others specific to your particular organization, but based on my experience, as well as what I see mostly in the marketplace today, these are the top 6 that I came up with. The first one there, improved visibility and control. Many organizations are geographically dispersed, operate under multiple lines of business and may have multiple ERP or procurement systems, which makes it very difficult for procurement teams to have a direct line of sight across the entire organization. Spend analytics platforms provide for this visibility, and once implemented, give you that continuous management or view into what you're spending your money on, thus increasing your control, or at least providing you the ability to implement the right controls. Rationalization of the supplier base. Once you know who you're spending your money with, you're able to ensure you are optimizing your supplier base. This is a big one where I find many organizations are unaware of how many different suppliers they're buying the same product or service from. Cost savings, a big one for all us procurement folks out there. Having complete visibility you will be able to leverage your entire spend across the entire organization. Furthermore, with a strong spend analytics approach and platform, you will be able to identify all your current costs, unit prices, etc., and develop a strong negotiation strategy and be able to generate opportunities at the category and supplier level. Improve data quality. You will have better data to make better decisions. Through a spend analytics platform, your data will be organized in a way that is useful and allows you to generate opportunities and/or action plans for your function or role within the organization. Increase compliance. With full transparency into all the transactions across the organization, you're able to track and manage compliance to internal policies and controls, procedures, contracts, preferred suppliers, etc. And as mentioned, with improved data quality, when you wrap it all up, you're able to make better decisions which can generate improved opportunities. Thus generating both from a cost reduction standpoint, as well as efficiencies in managing the overall portfolio of spend for your organization. Okay, so how do you start? And we've listed here a 6-step process in terms of how you start with spend analytics. And it starts with determining how to organize your data, how the data is used, both currently and how it would be used in the future. The third step would be determining which sources will supply that data. And then how are you going to transform that data into your purchasing strategies and management of your supplier base, which includes categorization of that spend, and then developing those clear action plans about once you're able to categorize and transform that data. So if we walk through each step in a little bit more detail, starting with how to organize the data, it's really determined based on how your organization would like to see or structure the data. From an entity or operating level, this could be by legal entities, business units, or geographies. You really need to determine what's important to your organization and align how you operate. For supplier name, you will want to go through a supplier normalization process to consolidate all the various versions of a supplier name or entities for which they bill you. For example, you could have Microsoft Canada, Microsoft Corporation, Microsoft Inc., etc. And you want to collapse all these into one name so you're able to have a complete picture of that one supplier. Another key decision point when determining what fields you'd like to capture is look for common or unique identifiers that you would find between your different source systems. For example, an order number or a PO number. This will help you when you're trying to match records between the different source systems, meaning if you really want to get to that granular detail at the invoice level, you can link that back to the actual amount paid to that supplier. Step 2 is really figuring out how the data is used today and by whom, and how you could benefit from using that data in the future. It's really how each of these organizations, it's largely going to benefit the procurement group in terms of how they're developing their strategies and how they approach and work with the different internal stakeholders, whether that be the subject matter experts, the end users themselves, or the executives. Step 3, determining which sources. So this could be multiple sources. Looking at, typically you would see ERP or your financial system in terms of buying, history, unit prices, volume, those types of things. Some companies may have additional systems as it relates to purchase requisitioning or P card or T&E card systems as well. Sometimes it makes sense to get additional data from any sales type systems in which you want to link to specific product codes or cost of goods sold. Production inventory systems is another one too, where you may want to get down to the granular level at an inventory or production schedule level. Suppliers, sometimes it may be required to go to third-party supplier systems in terms of finding out unit pricing, volume, and those types of things. Generally speaking, we would recommend asking for 3 years worth of data just to be able to build on history, identify trends in terms of buying behavior, spending patterns, and those types of things. Step 4, transforming your data. Generally speaking, most organizations divide their spend or even their procurement function within 2 functional categories: indirect spend versus direct spend. Indirect spend being non-manufactured products. They are acquired for internal use, and direct spend being manufactured or a direct input into your business. From there, you want to look at developing your own taxonomy in terms of how you would classify this type of spend. A lot of times, this can be custom based on your organization, which is generally what I would recommend. Or you could use UNSPSC codes or SIC codes, or E-class is another one, which is more prominent in Europe in terms of how you would classify your spend. And then really what you want to do in the first category, it's much more functional in terms of how your organization speaks or would organize the data. For the example there, information technology, this could be by department, product grouping, but it's much more functional or in terms of the way you operate as a business. Then as you further refine it into subcategories, it becomes a little bit more technical in terms of what that actual product or service is. And then as you further segment the spend or sub-segment the spend, you start getting more specific into that specific supplier's market or industry in which they operate in. Step 5 is now about classifying your suppliers. The goal, generally speaking, out of the gate, you want to be able to classify at least 80% of your spend is generally the KPI in which we work with in terms of trying to classify the total spend. From there, once we go beyond the categories or subcategories that I just spoke of, you want to look at other things in terms of where they fit in the Pareto curve, whether they are in the top 80% of the spend, in the bottom 5 to 10% of the spend, or in between there, which would be B class. The other things to consider is the spend addressable within your procurement organization, and would the existing supplier have a contract or not. You can further blow that out as well in terms of material contracts, in terms of when the expiry date is up, termination provisions, and those types of things as well. And then from there, once you've gone through the rigor of identifying all the gathering, all the data, classifying all the data, is really about developing your action plan. Here we have an illustration of the Pareto Principle, which basically represents that 20% of the suppliers represent 80% of the spend. And which I was just mentioning, these are your A-class suppliers. The flip side to that would be C-class, which is generally the 5 to 10%. And then the B-class would be that 15%, 10 to 15% as well. But generally where you would start as a base is you would focus your attention on those 20% suppliers and develop action plans for them. And whether that is renegotiation with an incumbent, consolidation of a number of suppliers that are providing the same product or service, or going out to the marketplace in a competitive fashion. Another thing is there's a lot of organizations out there use the spend analytics to create sourcing wave plans and drive, not only a forecast of activity for the next year, but the next 2, 3, and 5 years beyond. And the other thing here is a lot of times too is what comes out of the spend analytics process is just how you're going to deal with your tail spend, which is your C suppliers as well, which I see a lot of action plans develop in terms of how an organization would like to handle that type of spend. Okay, so just to recap it a little bit in terms of the overall process is first, you're going to identify how you want to organize your data, who uses the data, who's going to use it going forward, which source systems the data is going to come from. Then you want to extract that data. You want to go through some sort of cleansing process so that the data is all good quality data. You want to go through some sort of supplier normalization process in which you're eliminating duplicates, you're eliminating the differences in names, and you're coming up with one vendor record, which is enrich the data in terms of establishing your taxonomy on how you're going to classify the data, which leads into the last piece. And then you're going to be able to analyze the data and thus generate opportunities for your organization. All right, so this has brought us to, it's a little bit of a play on words in terms of spend analytics versus spend analysis. But I thought it would be good idea to explain in terms of what our position is, in terms of why we feel they're different. And I mentioned at the beginning, spend analytics is really the encompassing of all these processes, where spend analysis is just one process within the overall spend analytics platform. It typically is just one point in time, where spend analytics is more of a process that is ongoing in a continuous management process, or a continuous management of that spend. Typically, I know a lot of folks out there, I mean, spend analysis can be done. We're illustrating an example here of Excel versus a spend management platform, or spend analytics platform. A lot of times it could just be a snapshot of a specific piece of data, where spend analytics platform is about the entire organization and all encompassing. But the main difference here, as I mentioned even at the beginning of the webinar, is it's really a dedicated process and platform to analyzing spend versus more ad hoc and not one specific process or tool being used to perform the analysis. So if we look at the pros and cons of using, say, Microsoft Excel to perform a spend analysis, obviously it's inexpensive. Pretty much every organization today is licensed to use Microsoft Office. It's simple to use. Employees are already using the system today. The data is readily available. There's no extraction needed to generate reports. It's fairly easy from a reporting perspective. Cons can be time consuming, especially if you have to redo the spend analysis over and over again. Difficult to manage when multiple sets are involved. Again, very difficult to pull in multiple source systems, that type of stuff. There's no audit trail recording that you would find in a dedicated spend analytics platform. Struggle to find owners of the process, and there's no automated workflow processes built into with Excel. This becomes much more important when you're trying to update the data or redo the spend analysis for a different period of time. Prone to errors, and this is because it's very manual intensive and not a secure process. Let me apologize, my arrow buttons not working there. When we look at a spend analytics application or platform, the pros there is the data visualization's easier, quicker, and nicer. You're really picking an application for what it's meant to do. You can manage the data in real time. It's constantly being updated as you establish your integrations, links, and all that with the other source systems. Hands-on with the data, same point as I just mentioned. It's more customizable. You're able to customize the application to fit with your business and how you work within it. Consolidated view of all procurement activities. So you're really able to collapse all those different source systems into one system, generate one record of each of those transactions based on all the different source systems. Data can be collected from the different source systems, as I just mentioned. Cons, more expensive and require central management, generally within the procurement or sourcing organization. That's the difference between the two, and I'm sure some of the questions may come up in the Q&A here in terms of what we mean by the difference, but hopefully I explained that well enough that you understand where we're coming from. Okay, so in terms of, to give everybody a live example of spend analytics, the next slide is it's a real customer in which we performed a full spend analytics or implemented a spend analytics platform for them. Just for purposes of confidentiality, they needed to remain anonymous. But here's some of the key highlights of this specific use case. Total annual spend was $262 million, and they had almost 5,300 in total supplier records. In terms of the breakdown of their spend, 200 suppliers accounted for 80% of the spend. That's their A-class suppliers. 771 suppliers were 15% of their spend, B-class. And as you can see, a long tail spend of 4,322 suppliers, which was 5% of their spend. Some of the key insights and opportunities that we drove through this data, obviously, number one, excellent A-class. I mean, they already started with, 4% of their total suppliers accounted for 80% of the spend, which was great. However, they had a very long tail spend with an average transaction size of $282. One of the significant findings was we identified 108 different suppliers providing the same service with a total of $17 million in spend, which that was a huge opportunity to go out to the marketplace. And we actually reduced that down from 108 different suppliers down to 3 preferred suppliers and generated 30%, a little over 30% in savings for that specific service. Overall, we were able to identify 22 different opportunities through the spend analytics, which amounted to a total cost savings of $10 million annually, which was huge benefit. The other thing was we were able to reduce the supplier base, is still working on this significantly in terms of the tail spend, but implement a P-card program to account. As you see, the average transaction size was $282. We were able to cut the supplier base almost in half by just implementing a P-card program, as well as now we're working through some other activities to try and transition a lot of those other suppliers to some of the A class suppliers, or just outsource the balance of the tail spend to a third-party company. In that, Ben, I will turn it back to you.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Andrew. That was very insightful. I know it's always hard to cover this topic in 30 minutes because there's a lot of variables coming in. So yeah, I think we can now start with our Q&A session. We're still on time, so if you guys have any more questions, we can start answering them as they come in. You can just put them in the chat box. Any question?
Okay, maybe I've got one question. This is Oliver. How do you handle also the data collection from your ERP? Because sometimes it might be quite difficult to request a full extraction of the spend. How can you handle that? Who will be your main contact?
Yeah, so hi, Oliver. Your question is how you would extract the data from the ERP system?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Generally speaking, the best way to do it is just to get it in a CSV file in Excel and just get it, or a flat file directly from the ERP system. Generally, when I go into organizations, we go straight to the finance department to extract that data. That's usually the best way. And same with the other source systems. If they're able to put it into an Excel file, that's the best starting point.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Do you guys have any more questions? If not, I'm just going to wrap it up here. Nope, no more question. All right. So yeah, I hope you learned something. I hope you liked it enough to come back for our next webinar. Please stay tuned on LinkedIn. You will also most likely get an email notification for upcoming broadcasts. And of course, I'll send you guys the slideshow of today. I send it out to there tomorrow. So you can share it with your colleagues and friends. If you need any more insight or any help for your spend analysis project, feel free to email me at bconstantine@sourcing-force.com. You can also reach out to Andrew at wolfeprocurement.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, yeah, again, thank you all so much for your interest. And we're looking forward to hosting you all again soon. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.